Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Miriam Hyman, and I'm a program officer at the Recruitment Family Foundation. Today, I'll be doing the second webinar in the series on inclusive employment. And my goal for today is to provide you with some practical tips on how to be a more inclusive employer. I'll be talking about inclusion throughout the employment process, from advertising a job opening to supporting employees after they're hired. I'll also address culture changes in your organization so that all of your employees see inclusive hiring as a positive practice. And finally, I'll briefly discuss the importance of early work experience for young people with disabilities and how you might be able to provide this through internship opportunities. I want to start by refreshing your memories from the last webinar, or updating you if you didn't see the last webinar. During part one of this series, we spent a great deal of time discussing why employment is such a critical outcome for people with disabilities. For all of us, having a job means more than receiving a paycheck. Many of our closest friends are people we work with currently, or people we met in some experience that we hoped would prepare us for employment, like graduate school. Therefore, employment, and even the prospect of future employment, produces a social network. Also, research tells us that for people with and without disabilities, employment leads to benefits for physical health, mental health, self-esteem, and overall well-being. Some people might think that the jobs that people with disabilities have are menial and would therefore not be stimulating enough to produce these benefits. And we know that this just is not correct. So the answer to the question, why employment, is that for people with and without disabilities, employment brings many economic, social, and mental health benefits. Now that we're all on board about the importance of employment for people with disabilities, I'm going to spend the rest of our time together providing practical tips for how to be a more inclusive employer. First, the Americans with Disabilities Act states that a person is qualified for a job if he or she can perform the essential functions of that job. Synagogues might be exempt from the ADA, but I still think that this concept can be useful to help synagogue leaders frame their thinking about the issue. Every job has essential functions that if a person cannot complete, he or she cannot claim to be performing that job adequately. Most jobs have fringe tasks, things that people end up doing but really are not a defining part of that person's job. A receptionist has to be able to answer the phone. This is an essential function. The receptionist might also turn the lights on and off at the beginning and the end of the day, but someone else could assume this responsibility fairly easily, and nobody would claim that the receptionist wasn't doing the lights, he or she wasn't doing his or her job. If you define the essential functions of each and every job, it becomes clear whether or not a person with any ability is qualified for that job. Disability becomes less relevant to the conversation. If the job description is ambiguous, this leaves more room for ambiguity over people's qualifications. And this is especially harmful for people with disabilities. Second, if people with disabilities don't apply for your job, you won't have people with disabilities working in your organization. So how can we encourage people with disabilities to apply? We can state in job announcements that people of all abilities are welcome to apply. We can also make an effort to be welcoming throughout our entire organization. When people visit the website of your organization, do they see pictures of people with disabilities? Does the organization's website show a phone number for people to call to request accommodations for events? These are the same strategies that you probably already use your congregation welcome to potential congregants with disabilities. When an organization sends a message of welcome, it attracts diverse customers, or in this case, congregants, and also a diverse pool of applicants for open positions. And finally, partner with local disability organizations and ask them to spread the word about open positions. All this requires is emailing a job announcement to a contact at a local organization. This contact should have access to a huge network of people with disabilities, and this is one way to ensure that people with disabilities know about the opportunity. You might already know about relevant local disability organizations in your community. And if not, I encourage you to follow up with me, send me an email, and I will help you identify relevant organizations in your community. The job postings should be written in accessible formats so that people can read them. Microsoft Word has a tool to check for accessibility in your documents to ensure that people who use screen readers can read them, for example. The application itself should also be accessible. If using an online application, ask the person who is developing it to check into its accessibility. You should also be flexible with regard to how people provide application information. And it's a good idea to have multiple formats: online, paper, pencil, and or the opportunity to provide information verbally. When you invite someone for an interview, ask if they need any accommodations. For example, an email to a candidate can sound like, "We'd like you to come in and meet with us. Are you available next Wednesday at 3 o'clock? If you need any accommodations, please let us know." Some candidates might not know what you mean by this, and that's fine. People who need accommodations will feel comfortable asking for them. Many people wonder what you are and are not allowed to ask during the interview. The key is to be non-discriminatory. It's okay to ask about disability for two purposes. First, to determine whether or not a person will be able to fulfill the job requirements, and second, to identify reasonable accommodations or adjustments. This is straightforward if the essential functions of the job have already been identified. In a bit, I will discuss accommodations a bit more and what I mean when I use the word reasonable. Also, avoid questions that convey negative stereotypes. It's not appropriate to ask, "How will your disability impact your performance?" because this conveys the assumption that disability will, in fact, negatively impact performance. Instead, you can ask, "Will you need accommodations in order to perform this job?" Once again, the person will only be able to answer the question accurately if he or she has a clear understanding of what the job entails, what the essential functions of the job are. And the final thing I will say about the application process is that not everyone will disclose their disability. People with disabilities, like all people, have a right to privacy, and they do not need to disclose unless the disability will impact their work performance. However, if your organization sends a message of welcome and inclusion by asking about accommodations during the interview, for example, people will be more likely to disclose. And this is ideal because it means that you as the employer have the opportunity to provide accommodations that can ultimately maximize success and productivity of your employees. So now moving beyond the application process to talking about retention and support. Flexible policies help employers to attract and retain a diverse workforce. Flexible working hours can allow people with disabilities to work when they are most productive. For example, some people with disabilities take medications that can make them drowsy at certain times of the day. Give employees as much freedom as possible to choose their own working hours so that they can work when they will be most productive. Also, people with disabilities might have relatively frequent health and mental health appointments, and their care providers might be located close to their homes and not so close to their workplaces. Enabling people to work from home, not always, but sometimes, can help them maximize the hours of the day. Keep in mind that flexible policies benefit everyone. Parents who need to pick up their children after school, graduate students who might have class once or twice a week, etc. As employers, we do not want unnecessary rigidity to prevent us from employing the best people. Regarding accommodations for specific individuals, the Americans with Disabilities Act requires that employers provide reasonable accommodations. What is reasonable depends on the size and the financial capability of the employer. Most synagogues are exempt from the ADA, and I will not take the time now to discuss the complex considerations that go into determining what is and what is not reasonable. You as leaders know what is beyond the capacity of your organization to provide. Reasonable accommodations often include things like schedule adjustments, a screen reader, a desk with adjustable height, etc. Most accommodations are inexpensive. The average accommodation costs less than $500. Some accommodations are free, like providing more frequent breaks. It is also important to have a clear procedure in place for requesting accommodations. The availability of clear policies will help people get the support they need as soon as possible, and this will maximize their productivity. The final piece that I will discuss under retention and support is the issue of career development and advancement. Because the employment rate is so low, 24% for people with cognitive disabilities, people with disabilities who are competitively employed are considered to be extremely fortunate. However, we must remember that people with disabilities, like all of us, don't just want a job, they want a good job. We can't stop once we improve the rate of people who are employed. We must think about other issues. Are people working enough hours so that they can actually achieve financial independence? How can we address the gender pay gap that exists in this population, just like it exists in the population of people without disabilities? My own research found that the amount of time that people with cognitive disabilities spent at their job, the number of years that they were there, was related to job quality. This is after accounting for lots of other characteristics, including skill levels. So this is not explained by people with more skills being kept longer and promoted. What this means is that career development and advancement is possible for this population, and we should work to promote it. As you become a more inclusive employer, you may find that you have work to do in order to get other employees on board. This is a culture change piece. Studies show that employees with disabilities are good for companies' bottom line. They are good employees, highly motivated and productive, and this benefits organizations financially. They stay at jobs longer than employees without disabilities, and this reduced turnover is good for productivity, and it is also good financially because training new people is costly in terms of both time and money. Also, customers are attracted to businesses that are inclusive in their hiring practices. A diverse staff signals to potential congregants that your synagogue is a welcoming place. If you would like more advice about how to convey this message to your other employees, that inclusive hiring is good for your bottom line, please feel free to follow up with me. I'd be very happy to point you in the direction of more resources on this topic. I'm going to end our time together today by discussing one out-of-the-box way to be an inclusive employer, and that is to offer employment or internship experiences to young people with disabilities. First, I'd like us to get all on the same page with our thinking about why early employment in particular is so important. I'm going to give you a minute to think about this question. Think of an early employment experience. How did this experience get you in the door? How did it start you on your path to your future job experiences? So take a moment now to think about that. I'm guessing that as you think about that first job, even if it was something as simple as serving pizza, which I did in college, you recognize that it did have some substantial impact. When you apply for a job, you need work experience, and you need references that can attest to personal characteristics like maturity, conscientiousness, reliability, interpersonal skills, etc. That first job gives you a reference, and this reference is necessary for your next job, which will hopefully be a step up on the ladder. And it is possible that some of you have thoughts that speak more to the content of that first job. Maybe you worked as a babysitter or at a summer camp, and your earliest work experiences helped you to refine your interest in working with children and families, for example. The point I'd like to make is that early work experience is equally critical for young people with disabilities. One huge study, 340,000 households across the country were screened, 1,000 that included an adult with intellectual disability were selected, demonstrates the importance of early work experience or training, including an internship. The majority of the 1,000 adults were not competitively employed. Of the ones that were, the majority had their first job at a very young age before they turned 21. This has very important implications for a lot of the services that are provided to people with disabilities. Young adults with intellectual disability can be served by the public school system until they turn 22. This data suggests that we must also provide them with work experience before they reach this age. Only 2% of adults with intellectual disability who were competitively employed got their first job after age 30. This data is telling us that we cannot wait for them to be ready. They need experience as soon as possible. Also, some people believe that sheltered workshops, which are workshops for people with disabilities, provide an opportunity for people with disabilities to get experience, get comfortable before they enter into competitive employment. This huge national study tells us that sheltered employment is not a stepping stone to competitive employment. It is a dead end. Only 10% of those who were competitively employed ever in their entire lives worked in a sheltered workshop. I'm bringing this to your attention because I believe you as synagogue leaders have the ability to provide these early work experiences to young people. Young people are not necessarily looking for full-time jobs. They might be satisfied with a few hours per week, especially if they are still living at home and attending some type of educational program. From the perspective of an employer, a job that is only a few hours per week is not a big gamble. So this might be an easy entryway into the world of competitive inclusive employment. I wish you luck. I will end here and thank you all again for joining me today. If you have any questions or comments, please send me an email. I would love to hear from you.